fire had just started. There was a road through that gap, and apparently some of the men going back home, going through that gap, had thrown out a cigarette. And the fire wasn't any bigger around than it wasn't 40 feet across, I don't think. But in heavy leaves, an oak thicket. And there was a man on it, the maintenance man. And he says, "My gosh," he says, "I'm glad that you boys got here, because afraid that whirlwind had hit this thing and get clear away from me." And it wasn't but just we wasn't worried about it, but we hit it hard. And but there was a whirlwind hit that thing and just picked up a whole lot of fire and oak leaves and set it over across the road, and the wind got up real strong, and she took off up that mountain sounded like an express train. And that was the start of the Capitan Gap fire. And I was up part of the night and back and forth and flying Dean on the fire early of the morning and trying to get a little sleep at night. And the next day, Orville Luttrell, one of the game department men, had a crew of men up on top, and he come in and said that they saw a little bear cub up there that was by himself, and that country had pretty well burned off. And I said, "Well, Orville, you should have brought it in." He said, "Well, I was afraid the old bear was still up there and she'd come and get the cub." And there was a lot of that country that hadn't burned. And so Speed Simmons was the next man on the crew to go up there. He was with the game department too, and had lots of experience on fires. And he's a big, kind of a rough character, old Speed was. And he was in the habit of people doing what he said to do too. And that was why Dean put him up there in that spot, because Orville had said that it was a bad place, and if that fire could crown, and anybody that went in there could get in trouble. And Dean put Speed up there with this bunch of men. There was, I think, mostly soldiers. This mixed up crew. There was everybody up there. There was soldiers and well, just about every ranchers and everything. So, and I told Speed before he went up what Orville told me about the bear cub. But Speed forgot it by the time I got through talking. I'm sure of that. But I went to bed and went to sleep, and when I woke up, they told me that while I was asleep, Speed's crew had brought this cub in, and that Ross Flatley, the rancher that lived there about 14 miles from the fire, had taken him home with him because there was no place that they could keep him, and said he had pretty badly burned and he was sick. The boys on the fire that had picked him up had given him some candy and canned milk, and it didn't agree with him. So I asked Ross if I could borrow his car to go get the bear. The thing hit me that there was a bear cub in a fire that was burned, and the symbol, the Forest Service symbol was a bear cub, and I couldn't think what the bear cub's name, and I asked Dean and Sam Service, one of them, I don't know which one, said Smokey. And I remarked, I said, "Well, you know, this could be something, this bear being burnt in a forest fire, and there's no living symbol of Smokey, and if he is to live, it'd be all right. Why, it might amount to something as a living symbol." well, I borrowed Ross's car and went up to the ranch and got to get him. And Miss Flatley says, well, I'm sure glad you come to get that bear. Says he's cried and squalled all night and he's going to die. He's sick and badly burned. And the dog barked all night. Says, I haven't had much sleep. So I took a little bear. She had a little pasteboard box about the size of a shoebox. And I put him in that and went back to camp. And I talked to Dean and Sam Service about it. And I said, you know, I think that what I'd better do is take him to Santa Fe and to the vet and see what happens. I said, I hate to make that trip clear to Santa Fe, but we need some radio, so I'll use that for an excuse. And so I got into Santa Fe and went to come into the airport, what was Paul Regal's airport, Santa Fe at that time. And I told the lady that was in charge there, Mrs. Ettinger, that I brought in that bear, but not say anything about it because what we might do with it is a living symbol of Smokey, but he might die, and we didn't want to have him die on us. And to not say anything to the papers about it till we see what's going to happen. Well, of course, bringing a bear in this airplane, as quick as I left, Mrs. Ettinger called the Santa Fe New Mexican, and they went out there and took some pictures. And the fella, Art something, forget his last name, he named him Hotfoot Teddy in the paper. And big deal on it. We went back to camp, and then the fire pretty well, it was going, but it was pretty well knocked down after that. And I went back to Santa Fe and went down to see the bear and took Judy with me. And the doctor said, well, the burns, I'm taking care of them all right, but I can't get him to eat. And if we don't get some food in him, he's going to die. Well, Judy said, well, Daddy, let's take him home. Mom will make him eat. Well, we didn't take him home right then. But then, I don't know, it was the next day, I guess, we come back and the same thing happened. Judy was wanting to take him home, so we did. We took him home. And Ruth sent me to the store to get pablum, honey, and milk, and mixed up a concoction of baby food and poked it down his throat. A good thing he wasn't a big bear. She'd stick your finger down his throat. And she set the alarm clock for every 2 hours. I forget, it's 12 hours or the last couple of days that that darn alarm clock had going off and me trying to sleep. And she gave me to understand that she wasn't going to have that baby bear miss his food. And I had to move out on my work to get anything done and get away from that. But anyway, I went back to camp and I had contacted Harold Walter, who was a photographer, a very good friend of mine, and told him what we were cooking up. And I had talked to Mr. Barker about it, and he thought it was a good idea. And Harold Walter just took right a hold of it. And he was quite an outdoorsman anyway. And so he got Judy and the bear and the pictures and made pictures in the house. And we went back out to the fire, and Harold went with me. And Harold took several pictures out the fire. And in the meantime, a heavy fog, the wind had let up and the heavy fog come in and it squashed that fire. But the place where the bear had been, it had crowned, the fire had crowned, and it come over that bunch of firefighters, and old Speed had told those boys to get in those rock. There was a bunch of big heavy rock in there, and to wet their handkerchiefs with water and lay there with their faces down, but to also keep an eye on each other's backs, so anything dropping out of the fire, burning embers, they could catch them before they'd get someone get burned. And Speed told them also, he says, "Now I don't want a man running. I don't want a man to get up and start to run, because if he does, I'm going to hit him in the head with the shovel." And old Speed would have. He's that type of person. But that whole country had burned, and they had picked up the bear then. When they were coming out, the bear had hooked onto a tree and was pretty badly burned. And then we got back to Santa Fe, and the papers had picked up the pictures that Harold had, and that Art, that fellow from the Santa Fe, New Mexican, had made. And they went all over the United States. And then California wrote Mr. Barker a 60-word wire asking for the bear, that they'd like to use it as a living symbol to their flag. And he says, if the bear is worth that much to California, it's worth that much to us. They don't get New Mexico bear. And Harold Walter was a good friend of the forest supervisor in Santa Fe, and he contacted him, and they got together and they talked to Washington, and they went to first talk to Albuquerque, the regional office. And the regional office in Santa Fe said no way, they wasn't going to have anything to do with that bear. Well, the Forest Service office in Washington picked it right up, and they wanted they asked Mr. Barker if they could have the bear. And I began to think that he wasn't going to let them have it, because the bear belonged to the state of New Mexico, and Mr. Barker was a warden, New Mexico Game Warden, and he had the final say. And I kind of encouraged him to let them have it. It meant a lot, and New Mexico would surely not lose anything by it. Finally, he told them that they could, if game management would get the same publicity and recognition as Forest Service and fire prevention. Under those conditions, he'd let them have it. And they accepted it. And then the question come up, how were they going to get the bear to Washington? So I thought, well, the TWA would be a good chance. Probably they'd give him a free ride. Well, I called, Mr. Barker said, you take care of that end of it. And I called the main office, which was in Nebraska at the time, Omaha, I believe. And they said, yeah, they'd take the bear, but no one on a freight plane, but no one could ride with it. Mr. Barker said, no way. If that bear goes to Washington, some of us are going with it. So it was decided then they was going to have another way. And I had a good friend in Hobbs, Frank Hines, that had the Piper distributorship. And I called Frank and asked him if he could take care of that. He says, sure, I will. And he says, I'll get the old Bill Piper to be there in Washington to represent Piper Aircraft. And Mr. Barker says, well, who shall we have go with the bear? And I said, well, Homer is your assistant, and he has never been east of the Mississippi River. And he's got a son in Washington going to school, and he'd like to, I think it'd be real nice for him to go back, take it. And he said, well, how about me? And I said, well, now you're the boss. You can have who you want to. I wanted to go myself, but I wasn't in a position, I didn't think. So Homer, it was decided on the Homer to go. And I asked, and the arrangements was made, and for the trip, time was set. Well, this is getting a long time. Bear had been there for about a month then, and he was growing fast. When I first got him, he weighed 4 pounds, and he was up right close to 8 pounds. Homer asked if, he says, if I'm going to take that bear, so I'd kind of like to get acquainted with him. And I said, okay, you can take him home, and we'll, about 3 days before time to go, it'll be enough time. And he come and got him, and he asked what we'd been feeding him, and I told him puppet chow, and I gave him enough puppet chow for 3 days. Well, then the night before the plane was to go, they had a meeting in Seth Hall in Santa Fe to see Smokey going to Washington. And there was all the dignitaries in Santa Fe there, including, I don't think the governor was there, but everybody, there was a lot of people, Forest Service and city people, and so they had him on we was all sitting around a table, and I had the radio going. And I'd been wearing, he got so that he'd bite me. He always had bit Don and I, and because we'd change his bandages and hurt him, and every time chance he got, he'd give us a bite. And he got so that we had to have gloves on to keep from getting hurt. Pardon me. And I had on my gloves, and we was working on him there. We'd show him on the table on TV and the radio, and he reached over and grabbed me, and where my gloves wasn't above him, and I said something on the radio. I called him a bad name over the radio, and I know it went all over the air, but anyway, it's too late to do anything about it. And so the next morning we put him in the plane, and Frank Hines and Homer and the man from the Forest Service in Santa Fe, I can't call his name now, headed for Washington. And all I know about the Washington trip is what they told. That they said one of the places they called in and told them it had a bear that they were bringing in on the plane, and they were about to refuse them a landing. And but they finally explained to them what the score was, and where they went, they had a crowd. Wherever they stopped, they had a crowd, and to meet them. And they got to Washington in the rain, and they had quite a nice ceremony there. And that's as far as I know, think of about that. And later on, for some reason, I went to Washington. And I went out to see him, and he was growing fast. He was really doing good. They were taking very good care of him. And there's a lady there that she was assistant to the director. It seemed like she just had a way with those animals. And and Dr. Reed, I think, was in charge, and they had taken special care of him. And they said that the children that come in there, and the first thing that they'd want to see was Smokey Bear.